Hey gang, welcome to more of The Ring. Sorry the stream is a little later than normal. It's the holiday season and my family goes all out and it's wild. But, it's family. Hello, Alice, Delvin, Kohi. I hope I said that right. Lobsoul, Jeff, Don. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Be warned that this story we are reading is quite dark and has had questionable material. I will once again, if I come up to something bad, I will say something ahead of time. We ended with our hero, Asakawa, realizing that his wife and child have also seen the cursed videotape. So now the stakes are even higher than they were before. And he and his horrible best friend are about to go on a road trip and try and solve everything. So here we are with Chapter 5 of Part 3. October 15th, Monday. Every morning when he woke up now, Asakawa found himself wishing that it had all been a dream. He called a rent-a-car place in the neighborhood and told them he'd been in on schedule to pick up the car he'd reserved. They had his reservation on file, no mistake. Reality marched on without a break. He needed a way to get around if he was going to try and find out where that broadcast had originated. It would be too hard to break in on TV frequencies with an off-the-shelf wireless transmitter. He figured it had to have been done with an expertly modified unit, and the image on the tape was clear with no interference. That meant the signal had to have been strong and close. With more information, he might have been able to establish the area in which the broadcast was receivable, and thus pinpoint the point of origin. But all he had to go on was the fact that the television in Villa Log Cabin B4 had picked up the transmission. All he could do was go there, check out the lay of the land, and start going over the area with a fine-toothed comb. He had no idea how long it would take. He packed enough clothes for 3 days. He certainly wouldn't need any more than that. He and Shizu looked at each other, but Shizu didn't say anything about the video. Asakawa hadn't been able to think of a good lie, and so he'd let her go to bed with only the vaguest of excuses about the threat of death in a week. For her part, Shizu seemed to fear finding out anything specific, and seemed happy to let things remain ambiguous and unexplained. Rather than questioning him like she usually would, she seemed to guess at something on her own that made her keep an eerie silence. Asakawa didn't know exactly how she was interpreting things, but it didn't seem to assuage her uneasiness. As she watched her usual morning soap opera on TV, she seemed extraordinarily sensitive to noises from outside, starting from her seat any number of times. "Let's just not talk about this, okay? I don't have any answers for you. Just let me handle it." This was all Asakawa could think to say to calm his wife's anxieties. He couldn't allow himself to appear weak in front of his wife. Just as he was stepping out of the house, as if on cue, the phone rang. It was Ryuji. "I've made a fascinating discovery. I want you to tell me what you think." There was a hint of excitement in Ryuji's voice. "Can't you tell me about it over the phone? I'm supposed to go pick up a rental car." "A rental car? You're the one who told me to find out where the broadcast originated from." Right. Listen, put that on the back burner for a while and get over here. Maybe you don't have to go looking for an antenna after all. Maybe the whole premise will just crumble away." Asakawa decided to pick up the car first anyway, so that if he needed to go to South Hakone Pacific Land, he could leave straight from Ryuji's place. Asakawa parked the car with 2 wheels up on the sidewalk and banged on Ryuji's door. "Enter! It's unlocked." Asakawa jerked the door open and deliberately stomped through the kitchen. "So what's this big discovery?" he asked forcefully. "What's eating you?" Ryuji glanced over from where he sat cross-legged on the floor. "Just hurry up and tell me what you found." "Relax. How am I supposed to relax? Just tell me already." Ryuji held his tongue for a moment. Then gently he asked, "What's wrong? Did something happen?" Asakawa plopped himself down in the middle of the floor, clenching his hands on his knees. My wife and daughter watched that piece of shit." "Well, that's a hell of a thing. I'm sorry to hear that." Ryuji watched until Asakawa began to regain his composure. The latter sneezed once and blew his nose loudly. "Well, you want to save them too, don't you?" Asakawa nodded his head like a little boy. Well then, all the more reason to keep a cool head, so I won't tell you my conclusions. I'll lay out the evidence. I want to see what the evidence suggests to you first. That's why I couldn't have you all excited like that, see? I understand, Asakawa said meekly. Now go wash your face or something. Pull yourself together. Asakawa could cry in front of Ryuji. Ryuji was the outlet for all the emotions he couldn't break down and show his wife. He came back into the room, wiping his face with a towel, and Ryuji held out a piece of paper. On it was a simple chart. Some things were clear at a glance. Ryuji had broken down the video into separate scenes. Last night, I suddenly got the idea for this. You see what it is, right? The video consists of 12 scenes. I've given each one a number and a name. The number after the name is the length of the scene in seconds. The next number in brackets is, are you with me? The number of times the screen goes dark during that scene. Asakawa's expression was full of doubt. After you left yesterday, I started to examine other scenes besides the one with the infant, to see if they had any of these instances of darkness too. And lo and behold, there were in scenes 3, 4, 8, 10, and 11. The next column says real or abstract. What's that? Broadly speaking, we can divide the 12 scenes into two categories. The abstract scenes, the ones like images in the mind, what I suppose we could almost call mental landscapes, and the real ones, scenes of things that really exist, that you could actually look up at with your eyes. That's how I divided them. Here, Ryuji paused for a second. Now look at the chart. Notice anything? Well, your black curtain only comes down on the real scenes. Right, that's absolutely right. Keep that in mind. Ryuji, this is getting annoying. Hurry up and tell me what you're driving at. What does this mean? Now, hold your horses. Sometimes when one is given the answers up front, it dulls one's intuition. My intuition has already led me to a conclusion, and now that I have that in mind, I'll twist any phenomenon to rationalize holding on to that conclusion too. It's like that in criminal investigations, isn't it? Once you get the notion that he's the guy, it suddenly seems like all the evidence agrees with you. See, we can't afford to wander off the track here. I need you to back up my conclusion. That is, I want to see, once you've looked at the evidence, if your intuition tells you the same thing mine told me. Okay, get on with it. Alright, the black curtain only appears when the screen is showing real landscapes. We've established that. Now cast your mind back on the sensations you felt the first time you saw the images. We discussed the scene with the infant yesterday. Anything besides that? What about the scene with all the faces? Ryuji used the remote to find the scene. Take a good long look at those faces. The wall of dozens of faces slowly retreated, the number swelling into the hundreds, the thousands. When he looked closely at them, each one seemed different, just like real faces. How does this make you feel? Ryuji asked. Like somehow I'm the one being reproached. Like they're calling me a liar, a fraud. Right. As it happens, I felt the same thing. Or at least what I felt was very similar to the sensation you're describing. Asakawa tried to concentrate his nerves on where this fact led. Ryuji was awaiting a clear response. Well? Asked Ryuji again. Asakawa shook his head. It's no good. I've got nothing. Well, if you've had the leisure to spend more time thinking about it, you might notice the same thing I did. See, both of us have been thinking these images were captured by a TV camera. In other words, by a machine with a lens. No, they weren't. Well, what's this black curtain that momentarily covers the screen? Ryuji advanced the film frame by frame until the screen went black. It stayed black for 3 or 4 frames. If you calculated one frame at a 30th of a second, then the darkness lasted for about a 10th of a second. Why does this happen in the real scenes and not the imagined ones? Look more closely at the screen. It's not completely black. Asakawa brought his face closer to the screen. Indeed, it wasn't totally dark. Something like a faint white haze hung suspended within the darkness. A blurred shadow. What we have here is the persistence of vision. And as you watch, don't you get an incredible sense of immediacy, as if you're a participant in the scene? Ryuji looked Asakawa full in the face and blinked once, slowly. The black curtain. Huh, murmured Asakawa. Is this the blink of an eye? Exactly. Am I wrong? If you think about it, it's consistent. There are things we see with our eyes, but there are also scenes we conjure up in our minds. And since these don't pass through the retina, there's no blinking involved. But when we actually look with our eyes, the images are formed according to the strength of the light that hits the retina. And to keep the retina from drying out, we blink unconsciously. The black curtain is the instance when the eyes shut. Once again, Asakawa was filled with nausea. The first time he'd finished watching the video, he'd run to the toilet, but this time the evil chill was even worse. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had climbed into his body. The video hadn't been recorded by a machine. A human being's eyes, ears, nose, tongue, skin, all 5 senses had been used to make this video. These chills, this shivering, were from somebody's shadow sneaking into him through his sense organs. Asakawa had been watching the video from the same perspective as the thing within him. He mopped his brow again and again, but still it was damp with cold sweat. Did you know? Hey, are you listening? Individual differences aside, the average man blinks 20 times a minute and the average woman 15 times. That means it might have been a woman who recorded these images. Asakawa couldn't hear him. Hey, what's the matter? You look like you're dead already, you're so pale. Ryuji laughed. Look, on the bright side, we're one step closer to a solution now. If these images were collected by the sense organs of a particular person, then the charm must have something to do with the person's will. In other words, maybe she wants us to do something. Asakawa had temporarily lost his faculty of reason. Ryuji's words vibrated in his ears, but their meaning didn't make it to his brain. At any rate, we know what we have to do. We have to find out who this person is. Or was. I think he or she's probably no longer with us. And then we have to find out what this person desired while he or she was still alive. And that'll be the charm that will allow us to go on living. Ryuji winked at Asakawa, as if to say, "How am I doing?" Whew! Hey, Milo, and other folks joining us, welcome back. Yeah, the killer videotape is recorded from Sadako's viewpoint, which I don't think is really how the film presents it, because you see her in the tape, I think. I thought that was a really neat twist that the blinking is her. Asakawa had left the number 3 Tokyo-Yokohama freeway and was now heading south on the Yokohama-Yokosuka road. Ryuji had reclined the passenger seat and was sleeping a perfect, stressless sleep. It was almost 2 in the afternoon, but Asakawa wasn't the least bit hungry. Asakawa reached out a hand to wake Ryuji, but then pulled it back. They weren't at their destination yet. Asakawa didn't even really know what the destination was. All Ryuji had done was tell him to drive to Kamakura. He didn't know where they were going or why they were going there. It made him a nervous, irritable driver. Ryuji had packed in a hurry, saying he'd explain where they were going once they were in the car. But once underway, he'd said, "I didn't sleep last night. Don't wake me till Kamakura," and then he'd promptly gone to sleep. He exited the Yokohama-Yokosuka road at Asahina and then took the Kanazawa road 5 kilometers until they reached Kamakura station. Ryuji had been asleep for a good 2 hours. "Hey, we're here," said Asakawa, shaking him. Ryuji stretched his body like a cat, rubbed his eyes with the backs of his hands, and shook his head rapidly from side to side, lips flapping. "I was having such a pleasant dream." "What do we do now?" Ryuji sat up and looked out the window to see where he was. "Just go straight on this road, and when you reach the outer gate to the Hachiman shrine, turn left and stop." Then Ryuji went to lie down again, saying, "Maybe I can still catch the tail end of that dream, if you don't mind." "Look, we'll be there in 5 minutes. If you've got time to sleep, you've got time to explain to me what we're doing here." "You'll see once we get there," said Ryuji, jamming his knees up against the dashboard and going back to sleep. Asakawa made the left and stopped. Dead ahead was an old 2-story house with a small sign reading Tetsuyo Miura Memorial Hall. "Pull into that parking lot." Ryuji had apparently opened his eyes slightly. He wore a satisfied look and his nostrils were flared like he was sniffing perfume. "Thanks to you, I was able to finish my dream." "What was it about?" asked Asakawa as he was turning the steering wheel. "What do you think?" "I was flying. I love dreams where I'm flying." Ryuji snorted happily and licked his lips. The Tetsuzo Miura Memorial Hall looked deserted. A large open space on the ground floor featured photographs and documents in frames or on the walls or in cases under glass, and an outline of this Miura fellow's achievements was plastered on the center wall. Reading it, Asakawa finally figured out who the man was. "Excuse me, is there anybody here?" called Ryuji into the depths of the building. There was no reply. Tetsuzo Miura had died 2 years ago at the age of 72, after retiring from a professorship at Yokodai University. He'd specialized in theoretical physics, concentrating on theories of matter and statistical dynamics. But the memorial hall, modest as it was, didn't result from his achievements as a physicist, but from his scientific investigations of paranormal phenomena. The resume on the wall claimed the professor's theories had attracted worldwide interest, although undoubtedly only a limited number of people paid any actual attention. After all, Asakawa had never heard of the guy. And what exactly were this man's theories? To find the answer, Asakawa began to examine the items on the walls and in the display cases. Thoughts have energy, and that energy... Asakawa had read this far when he heard, echoing from another room, the sound of someone hurrying down the stairs. A door opened and a 40-ish man with a mustache poked his head in. Ryuji approached the man, holding out one of his business cards. Asakawa decided to follow his example and took his own card holder from his breast pocket. "My name is Takayama. I'm at Fukuzawa University." He spoke smoothly and affably. Asakawa was amused at how different he sounded. Asakawa held out his own card. Faced with the credentials of an academic and a reporter, the man looked rather dismayed. It was Asakawa's card he was frowning at. "If it's all right, there's something we'd like to consult with you about." "What would that be?" The man eyed them cautiously. Ooh, I can't read today. "Hello, Claire and Succubus. Hello." Alright. That does remind me, Delvin makes the point. It's been a while since I technically did a questions video yesterday because my niece wanted to do a blog, but we'll have to do another Q&A soon this week. Let's see, where was I? "As a matter of fact, I once had the pleasure of meeting the late Professor Miura." For some reason, the man seemed relieved to hear this and relaxed his expression. He brought out 3 folding chairs and arranged them to face each other. "Is that so? Please, have a seat." "It must have been about 3 years ago." "Yeah, that's right. It was the year before he died. My alma mater was sounding me out about possibly giving a lecture on the scientific method, and I thought I might take the opportunity to hear what the professor had to say." "Was it here in this house?" "Yes. Professor Takasuka introduced us." Hearing this name, the man at last smiled. He realized he had something in common with his visitors. These two must be on our side. They're not here to attack us after all. "I see. I'm sorry about all that. My name is Tetsuaki Miura. Sorry, I'm fresh out of business cards." "So you must be the professor's—" "Yes, I'm his only son. Hardly worthy of the name, though." "Is that right? I had no idea the professor had such an outstanding son." It was all Asakawa could do to keep from laughing at the sight of Ryuji addressing a man 10 years older than himself and calling him an outstanding son. Tetsuaki Miura showed them around briefly. Some of his late father's students had gotten together after his death to open the house to the public, and to put in order the materials he'd collected over the years. As for Tetsuaki himself, he said, somewhat self-depreciatingly, that he hadn't been able to become a researcher like his father had wanted, had instead built an inn in the same lot as the hall and devoted himself to managing it. "So here I am, exploiting his land and reputation. Like I say, I'm hardly a worthy son." Tetsuaki gave a chagrined laugh. His inn was used largely for high school excursions, mostly physics and biology clubs, but he also mentioned a group devoted to parapsychological research. High school clubs needed a reason to go on trips. Basically, the memorial hall was bait to bring in student groups. "By the way," Ryuji sat straight up and tried to guide the conversation to the heart of the matter. "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm afraid I've been boring you babbling on like this. Tell me, what brings you here?" It was apparent that Tetsuaki didn't have much of talent for science. He was nothing but a merchant who adjusted his attitude to suit the situation. Asakawa could tell Ryuji thought little of the man. "To tell the truth, we're looking for someone." "Who?" "Actually, we don't know the name. That's why we're here." "I'm afraid I don't follow you." Tetsuaki looked troubled, as if to urge his visitors to make a little more sense. We can't even say for sure if this person's alive or already dead. What's clear is this person had powers ordinary people don't. Ryuji paused to watch Tetsuaki, who seemed to understand immediately what he meant. Your father was probably Japan's greatest collector of this sort of information. He told me that using a network of connections he himself had forged, he'd assembled a list of people all over the country with paranormal powers. He said he was storing the information. Tetsuaki's face clouded over. Surely they weren't going to ask him to search through all those records for a single name. Yes, of course, the files have been preserved, but there are so many of them, and many of those people are frauds anyway. Tetsuaki blanched at the thought of looking through all those files again. It had taken a dozen of his father's students several months to organize them. Following the wishes of the deceased, they'd even included uncertain cases, swelling the number of files further. We certainly don't intend to put you to any trouble. With your permission, we'll search through them ourselves, just the two of us. They're in the archives upstairs. Perhaps you'd like to take a look first. Tetsuaki stood up. They could only talk like that because they had no idea how much there was. Once they had a look at those shelves, he had a feeling they wouldn't feel like tackling them. He led them to the second floor. The archives were in a high-ceilinged room at the head of the stairs. They entered the room to find themselves facing two bookcases of 7 shelves each. Each file book contained materials relating to 40 cases, and at first glance there seemed to be thousands of file books. Asakawa didn't notice Ryuji's reaction. He was too busy turning pale himself. If we spend time on this, we could die in this gloomy room. There's gotta be another way. Ryuji, unfazed, asked, "Do you mind if we have a look?" "Go right ahead." Tetsuaki stayed and watched for a little while, half out of astonishment and half out of curiosity to see just what they thought they'd find. But eventually he seemed to have given up on them. "I've got work to do," he said, leaving. When they were alone, Asakawa turned to Ryuji and spoke. "So, you want to tell me what's going on?" His voice was a bit thick because he was still craning his neck looking at all the files. These were the first words he'd spoken since entering the hall. The files were arranged in chronological order, beginning with 1956 and ending in 1988. 1988. That was the year Miura had died. Only death had brought down the curtain on his 32-year quest. "We don't have much time, so I'll tell you where to look. It'll start with 1956, you start with 1960. Asakawa tentatively pulled out a file and flipped through it. Each page contained at least one photo and a piece of paper on which was written a short description, as well as a name and an address. "What am I looking for?" "Pay attention to names and addresses. We're trying to find a woman from Izu Oshima Island." "A woman?" asked Asakawa, cocking his head questionably. "Remember the old woman on the video? She told somebody they were going to give birth to a daughter. Think she was talking to a man?" Ryuji was right. So they started searching. It was simple, repetitive task, and since Asakawa asked why these files existed in the first place, Ryuji explained. Professor Miura had always been interested in supernatural phenomena. In the 50s, he'd begun experiments with paranormal powers, but he hadn't gotten any results reliable enough to allow him to formulate a scientific theory. Clairvoyants would find themselves unable to do in front of an audience what they'd easily done before. It took a lot of concentration to be able to display these powers. What Professor Miura was searching for was the kind of person who could exert his or her power any time, under any circumstances. He could see that if the person failed in front of witnesses, Miura himself would be called a fraud. He was convinced there must be more people out there with paranormal powers than he knew about, so he set about finding them. But how was he to do this? He couldn't interview everybody to check for clairvoyance, second sight, telekinesis, so he came up with a method. To anybody who might possibly have such powers, he sent a piece of film in a securely sealed envelope and asked them to imprint upon it with their minds a certain pattern or image, and then send it back to him still sealed. In this way, he could test the powers of people even at great distances, and since such psychics photography seemed to be a fairly basic power, people who possessed it seemed to be clairvoyant as well. In 1956, he'd begun to recruit paranormals from all over the country, with the help of former students of his who'd gone to work for publishers and newspapers. These former students helped set up a network which would report any rumor of supernatural powers straight back to Professor Miura. However, an examination of the film returned to him suggested there was no more than a tenth of claimants actually had any power. The rest had skillfully broken the seal and replaced the film. Obvious cases of deception were weeded out at this point, but cases where it wasn't clear one way or the other were kept, ultimately resulting in the unmanageable collection Asakawa saw before him. In the years since Miura had started, the network had been perfected through the development of the mass media and an increase in the number of participating former students. The data had piled up year after year until the man died. Ooh, 1 second. Blow my nose. I yearn for the end of allergies. Whew. These guys are so lucky that their country had an eccentric who wanted to research this stuff. Alright. I see, murmured Asakawa. So that's the meaning of this collection. But how do you know the name of the person we're looking for is in here? I'm not saying it definitely is, but there's a strong possibility it's here. I mean, look at what she did. You know yourself there are a few people who could actually produce psychic photos. There can't be too many paranormals who can actually project images onto a television without any equipment whatsoever. That's power of the highest order. Someone with that kind of power would stand out, even if they didn't try to. I don't think Miura's network would have let someone like that slip through. Asakawa had to admit the possibility was genuine. He redoubled his efforts. By the way, why am I looking at 1960? Asakawa suddenly looked up. Remember the scene on the video that shows a television? It was a rather old model, one of the early sets from the 50s or 60s. But that doesn't necessarily mean... shut up. We're talking probabilities here, right? Asakawa chided himself for being so irritated this last little while, but he had good reason to be. Given the limited time frame, the number of files was huge. It would have been more unnatural to be calm about it. At the moment, Asakawa saw the words Izu Oshima in the file he was holding. "Hey, got one!" he yelled triumphantly. Ryuji turned around, surprised, and peered at the file. Motomachi, Izu Oshima, Teruko Tsuchida, age 37. Postmarked February 14th, 1960. A black and white photograph showing a white lightning-like slash against a black background. The description read, subject sent this with a note predicting a cross-shaped image. No traces of substitution. How about that? Asakawa trembled with excitement as he waited for Ryuji's response. It's a possibility. Take down the name and address just in case. Ryuji turned back to his own search. Asakawa felt better for having found a likely candidate so soon, but at the same time he was a bit dissatisfied with Ryuji's brusque reaction. 2 hours passed. They didn't find another woman from Izu Oshima. Most of the submissions were either from Tokyo itself or the surrounding Kanto region. Tetsuaki appeared, offering them tea and 2 or 3 possible sarcastic comments before leaving. Their hands on the files were getting slower and slower. They'd been at it for 2 hours and hadn't even polished off a year's worth. Finally, somehow, Asakawa got through 1960. As he went to start on 1961, he happened to glance at Ryuji. Ryuji was sitting cross-legged on the floor, motionless, face buried in an open file. Is he asleep, the idiot? Asakawa reached out his hand, but then Ryuji emitted a stifled groan. I'm so hungry I could die. How about you go buy us some takeout oolong tea? Oh, and make reservations for this evening at Le Petit Pension Soleil. What the hell? That's the inn the guy runs. I know that, but why would I want to stay there with you? You'd rather not? For starters, we haven't got time to lounge around in an inn. Even if we find her now, there's no way to get to Izu Oshima right now. We can't go anywhere today. Don't you think it'd be better to get a good night's sleep and marshal our energy for tomorrow? Asakawa felt an indescribable aversion to spending the night with Ryuji at an inn. Good instincts, buddy. Oh, hey, Billy. Hello. And thank you for the support, Daniel. I'm glad you're enjoying the book. There was no alternative, so he gave up and went out to buy food and tell Tetsuaka Miura they'd be staying the night. Then he and Ryuji ate their takeout and drank their oolong tea. It was 7 in the evening, a brief respite. His arms were tired and his shoulders stiff. His eyes swam. He took off his glasses. Instead, he held the files close enough to his face he could lick them if he wanted. He had to use all his concentration, or he was afraid he'd miss something, which tired him even more. 9 o'clock. The silence of the archives was broken by Ryuji's mad screech. I found it, finally! So that's where she was hiding. Asakawa felt himself drawn to the file. He sat down next to Ryuji, put his glasses back on to look at it. It said, Izu Oshima, Sashikiji, Sadako Yamamura, age 10. The envelope was postmarked August 29th, 1958. Subject sent this with a note predicting it would be imprinted with her own name. She's the real thing without a doubt. Attached was a photograph showing the character Yama, mountain, in white against a black background. Asakawa had seen the character somewhere before. That's it. His voice trembled. On the video, the scene of the eruption of Mount Mihara had been followed immediately by a shot of the character for Mountain, identical to this one. Not only that, the screen of the old television in the 10th scene had displayed the character Sada. This woman's name was Sadako Yamamura. "What do you think?" asked Ryuji. "No question about it. This is it." At long last, Asakawa found hope. The thought crossed his mind that maybe, just maybe, they'd beat the deadline. Yes, Bobby came to say hello. Can you say hello, Bob? Can I lift you up? Hello, Bob. You say hello? You say hello? Hello. Don't look at me. Look over there. Say, Mom, why you do this? Mom. Gandalf's also chilling with us, but he's out of frame. Chapter 6. October 16th, Tuesday. 10:15 a.m. Ryuji and Asakawa were on a high-speed passenger boat that had just left port at Atami. There was no regular ferry linking Oshima and the mainland, so they'd have to leave the car in the parking lot next to the Atami Korakuen Hotel. Asakawa was still clutching the key in his left hand. They were scheduled to arrive on Oshima in an hour. A strong wind blew and it looked like rain. Most of the passengers hadn't ventured out onto the decks, but stayed huddled in their reserved seats. Asakawa and Ryuji had been in too much of a hurry to check before buying their tickets, but it looked like a typhoon was approaching. The waves were large and the rocking of the boat was worse than usual. Sipping a can of hot coffee, Asakawa went over the whole chain of events again in his mind. He wasn't sure if they should congratulate themselves for having come this far, or reproach themselves for not having found out about Sadako Yamamura and set out for Oshima Island earlier. Everything had hung on noticing that the black curtain flashing momentarily over the images on the video was eyelids blinking. The images had been recorded not by machine but by the human sensory apparatus. Essentially, the person had focused her energies on the video deck at cabin B4 while it was recording, and created not a psychic photo, but a psychic video. That is not actually an item from Silent Hill 2, but it is a kind of goblet. Right now there's a project up behind me that's blocking your view, but I bought a Japanese folding screen and I'm trying to restore it, so that's the only place in my room it can stand. Let's see here. Ryuji had assumed that such a person would stand out from the crowd and gone looking for her, and had ultimately found her name. Not that they knew for sure Sadako Yamamura was in fact the culprit. She was still just a suspect. They were heading to Oshima in order to follow up on their suspicions. The sea was rough, causing the boat to pitch and roll violently. Asakawa felt an ugly premonition coming over him. Maybe it hadn't been such a good idea for both of them to go to Oshima. What if they got tied down by the typhoon and couldn't leave the island? Who'd save his wife and daughter? The deadline was almost at hand. 10:04 p.m. the day after tomorrow. Asakawa warmed his hands with the coffee can and shrank down into his seat. I still can't believe it, that a human being could really do something like that. It doesn't matter if you believe it or not now, does it? Ryuji answered, without taking his eyes from the map of Oshima. Anyway, it's reality staring you straight in the face. All we're seeing is one small part of a continuously changing phenomenon. Ryuji set the map down on his knee. You know about the Big Bang, right? They believe the universe was born in a tremendous explosion 20 billion years ago. I can mathematically express the form of the universe from its birth to present. It's all about the differential equations. Most phenomena in the universe can be expressed with differential equations, Using them, you can figure out what the universe looked like 100 million years ago, 10 billion years ago, even a tenth of a second after that initial explosion. But, no matter how far we go back, no matter how we try to express it, we just can't know what it looked like at zero, at the very moment of the explosion. And there's another thing. How is the universe going to end? Is it expanding or contracting? See, we don't know the beginning and we don't know the end. All we know is the in-between stuff. And that, my friend, is what life is like. Ryuji poked Asakawa in the arm. I guess you're right. I can look at photo albums and get a reasonable idea of what I was like at 3 years old or when I was a newborn. See what I mean? But what's before birth? What's after death? These are things we just can't know. After death. When you die, that's the end. You just disappear. That's all, right? Have you ever died? No, I haven't. Asakawa shook his head with utter earnestness. Well, then you don't know, do you? You don't know where you go after you die. Are you saying there's such a thing as spirits? Look, all I can say is, I just don't know. But when you're talking about the birth of life, I think things go a lot smoother when you posit the existence of a soul. None of the claptrap of modern molecular biologists actually sounds real. What are they really saying? Take hundreds each of 20-odd different amino acids, put them in a bowl, mix them all together, add a little electrical energy, and voila, protein, the building block of life? And they really expect us to believe that. Might as well tell us we're all children of God. That'd be easier to swallow. What I think is that there's a completely different kind of energy involved at the moment of birth, almost like there's a certain will at work. Ryuji seemed to lean in a little closer to Asakawa, but then he suddenly changed the subject. By the way, I couldn't help but notice you were engrossed in the professor's oeuvre back at the memorial hall. Come across anything interesting? Now that he mentioned it, Asakawa remembered he'd started to read something. Thoughts have energy. And that energy... I think it was something about thoughts being energy. What else? I didn't have the time to finish reading it. That's too bad. You were just getting to the good part. The professor could really make me laugh, the way he'd set out in all seriousness things that would shock normal people. What the old man was saying, basically, is that ideas are life forms with energy of their own. Huh? You mean the thoughts in our heads can turn into living beings? That's about the size of it. Well, that's a rather extreme suggestion. It is indeed, but similar ideas have been propounded since before the time of Christ. I suppose you could just look at it as a different theory of life. Having said this much, Ryuji suddenly seemed to lose interest in the conversation, returning his gaze to the map. Asakawa understood what Ryuji was saying, most of it anyway, but it didn't sit very well with him. We may not be able to scientifically explain what we're facing, but it's real, and because it's real, we have to face it as a real phenomenon and deal with it as such, even if we don't understand its cause or effect. What we need to concentrate on right now is figuring out the riddle of the charm and saving our own asses, not unlocking all the secrets of the supernatural. Ryuji might have some good points, but what Asakawa really needed from him were clearer answers. The farther out to sea they went, the worse the motion of the boat, and Asakawa began to worry he'd get seasick. The more he thought about it, the more he thought he felt an unsettled feeling in his chest. Ryuji, who had been nodding off, suddenly raised his head and looked outside. The sea was throwing up dark gray waves, and in the distance they could see the dim shadow of an island. Ugh. All right. You know, Asakawa, something's worrying me. What? The 4 kids who stayed at the log cabin. Why didn't they try to carry out the charm? That again. Wasn't it obvious they didn't believe the video? Well, that's what I thought. It explains why they'd pull a prank like erasing the charm. But I was just remembering a trip I took with the track team back in high school. In the middle of the night, Saito comes bursting into the room. You remember Saito, right? Kind of not all there. There were 12 of us on the team, and we were all sleeping together in one room. And that idiot comes running in, teeth chattering, and screams, "I've seen a ghost!" He opened the bathroom door and saw a little girl crouched behind the trash can by the sink. She was crying. Now, aside from me, how do you think the other guys reacted to this? They probably half believed it and half laughed it off. Ryuji shook his head. That's how it'd work in a horror movie or on TV. At first no one takes it seriously, and then one by one they're picked off by the monster, right? But it's different in real life. Every single one of them, without exception, believed him. All 10. And not because they were all especially chicken either. You could try it on any group of people and get the same results. A fundamental sense of terror is built into us humans on the instinctual level. So what you're saying is, it's strange they didn't believe the video. As he listened to Ryuji's story, Asakawa recalled the face of his daughter, crying from seeing the demon mask. He remembered how puzzled he'd been. How had she known the demon mask was supposed to be scary? Well, the scenes on the video don't tell a story, and they're not all that frightening to just look at, so I suppose it's possible to disbelieve it. But weren't they at least bothered, those four? If you were told that carrying out a charm would save your life, even if you didn't believe it, wouldn't you feel you ought to give it a try anyway? I would have expected at least one of them to break rank. I mean, even if he or she insisted on putting on a brave face in front of the others, they could always perform the charm in secret after getting back to Tokyo. Asakawa's bad feeling grew stronger. He actually wondered the same thing himself. What if the charm turns out to be something impossible? Maybe it was something they couldn't carry out, so they convinced themselves they didn't believe it anyway. An example occurred to Asakawa. What if a woman who'd been murdered left a message in the world of the living in an effort to get someone else to avenge her so she could be at peace? I know what you're thinking. What would you do if that turned out to be the case? Asakawa asked himself, if the charm included a command to kill someone, would he be able to do it? Would he be able to kill a perfect stranger to save his own life? But what worried him more was, if it came to that, who would be the one to carry out the charm? He shook his head furiously. Stop thinking such stupid things. All he could do at the moment was pray that this Sadako Yamamura person's desire was something anybody could fulfill. The outlines of the island were becoming clearer. The wharf at Monomachi Harbor was slowly coming into view. Listen, Ryuji, I have a favor to ask. Asakawa spoke fervently. What's that? If I don't make it in time, that is... Asakawa couldn't bring himself to say the word die. If you figure out the charm the very next day, could you... Well, there's my wife and daughter. Ryuji cut in. Of course. Leave it to me. I'll be responsible for saving wifey and babykins. Asakawa took out one of his business cards and wrote a phone number on the back. I'm going to send them to her parents' house in Ashikaga until we solve this thing. This is the number there. I'm going to give it to you now before I forget. Ryuji put the card in his pocket without even glancing at it. Just then came the announcement that the ship had docked at Monomachi on Oshima Island. Asakawa intended to call home from the waterfront and convince his wife to go home to her parents for a while. He didn't know when he'd get back to Tokyo. Who knew? Time might run out for him here on Oshima. He couldn't stand the thought of his family, alone and terrified in their little condo. As they walked down the gangway, Ryuji asked, Hey, Asakawa, do a wife and kid really mean that much? It was a very un-Ryuji-like question. Asakawa couldn't help but laugh as he replied, You'll find out one of these days. But Asakawa didn't really think Ryuji was capable of starting a normal family. Yeah, don't. Just die. We know this character's being set up to die. Just die. Okay, one more second. I am going... The problem with the holiday season is you bring in all these boxes and all these decorations from the garage that are covered in dust and so much stuff, and I'm allergic to dust. So this week has been horrible, but it's starting to pass finally. All right. Oh yeah, the Christmas background matches the book. Chapter 7. The wind was stronger here on the pier at Oshima than it had been on the wharf at Atami. Overhead, the clouds were scurrying from east to west, while underfoot the concrete jetty shook with the force of waves breaking against it. The rain wasn't falling that hard, but the raindrops, borne by the wind, were hitting Asakawa's face head-on. Neither of them had umbrellas. They jammed their hands into their pockets and hunched forward as they walked quickly along the pier over the ocean. Islanders holding placards for car rental companies or banners for inns were there to greet the tourists. Asakawa lifted his head and looked for the person who was supposed to meet them. Before getting on the boat at the harbor in Atami, Asakawa had contacted his office and asked for the phone number of the Oshima office, ultimately enlisting the help of a correspondent named Hayatsu. None of the national news organizations had full-fledged bureaus on Oshima. Instead, they hired locals as stringers. These correspondents kept an eye on island doings, watching for any noteworthy incidents or interesting episodes, and reporting them to the main office. They were also responsible for assisting any reporters dispatched to the island on stories. Hayatsu had worked for the Daily News before retiring to Oshima. Come here, you. No, come back, dang it! Ah, he got away. Come on, kitty. Don't you want to come say hi? You were almost in the video. Almost. Oh, now he's being shy. Come on. Come on. I'm not going to be able to get him without dislodging Bob. Come here. Oh, now he's just sitting right out of reach, like, haha. Come on. Come on. I got you. I got you. Ooh. Hello, big boy. Can you say hi? Umbrellas and smiled good-naturedly. Sorry to impose on you so suddenly like this. We really appreciate the help. As they hurried to both hands on the steering wheel. He was over from Sashikiji. I knew right away who it was. There's only one family by that name here. Yamamura is a fisherman who runs his house as a bed and breakfast in the summer. Back at Ryuji. I'm fine with that. Hayatsu's little car sped toward the Sashikiji district on the southern tip of the island. Sped as much as it could, that is. The Oshima Ring Road circling the island was too narrow and winding to go very fast. The vast majority of cars they passed were also compacts. At times, their field of visions opened up on their right to reveal the ocean. Yeah, did it glitch? It flashed on me, too. Oh, no. Are we still going? It says here the stream has only been going for 2 minutes, which means it refreshed itself, but it might have come back. Give me a sign if you can still see me, guys. I'm gonna check the YouTube page. Let's see here. Yeah, it says we're still alive. It must have just gone weird for a second. Can y'all still see me? Okay, it's okay now. You missed some of the story? Where did we... what do y'all remember hearing last? It's so strange that when I stream this late in the evening, we always have problems. It's gotta be that my family's here, but my brother's playing video games. He's not using the... Anyway, I don't know what's up there. I don't know. I'll jump back to when they met Hayatsu. On the phone, Hayatsu himself had responded positively to Asakawa's request, promising to meet him at the jetty. Since they'd never met, Asakawa had described himself and said he was traveling with a friend. Now he heard a voice from behind. "Excuse me, are you Mr. Asakawa?" "Yes." "I'm Hayatsu," the Yoshima responded. He held out umbrellas and smiled good-naturedly. "Sorry to impose on you so suddenly like this. We really appreciate your help." As they hurried to Hayatsu's car, Asakawa introduced Ryuji. The wind was so loud they could hardly speak over it until they climbed inside the vehicle. It was a compact but surprisingly spacious inside. Asakawa rode in front, Ryuji in the back. "Shall we go straight to Takashi Yamamura's house?" asked Hayatsu, both hands on the steering wheel. He was over 60 and had a full head of hair, though much of it was gray. "So you've already found Sadako Yamamura's family?" Asakawa had already told Hayatsu on the phone they were coming to investigate someone by that name. "It's a small town. Once you said it was a Yamamura from Sashikiji, I knew right away who it was. There's only one family by that name here. Yamamura is a fisherman who runs his house as a bed and breakfast in the summertime. What do you think? We could have him put you up there tonight. Of course, you're welcome at my place, too, but it's a little small and run down. I'm sure having you stay there would be an imposition on you." Hayatsu laughed. He and his wife lived alone, but he wasn't exaggerating. They really didn't have room to sleep 2 guests. Asakawa looked back at Ryuji. "I'm fine with that." Hayatsu's little car sped toward the Sashikiji district, on the southern tip of the island. Sped as much as it could, that is. The Oshima Ring Road circling the island was too narrow and winding to go very fast on. The vast majority of the cars they passed were also compacts. At times, their field of vision opened up to their right to reveal the ocean, and when it did, the sound of the wind would change. The sea was dark, reflecting the deep leaden color of the sky, and it heaved violently, throwing up whitecaps. If it hadn't been for those brief flashes of white, it would have been difficult to tell where the sky stopped and the sea began, or where the sea stopped and the land began. The longer they gazed, the more depressing it seemed. The radio blared a typhoon alert, and their surroundings became even darker. They veered right at a fork in the road and immediately entered a tunnel of camellias. They could see bare roots beneath the camellias tangled and wizened. Long years of exposure to wind and rain had eroded some of the plant's soil. Now they were wet and slick with rain. It looked to Asakawa like they were speeding through the intestines of a huge monster. Sashikiji is dead ahead, said Hayatsu, but I don't think this Sadako Yamamura woman is here anymore. You can get the details from Takashi Yamamura. From what I hear, he's a cousin of her mother's. How old would Sadako be now? Asked Asakawa. For some time now, Ryuji had been scrunched down in the back seat, uttering not a word. I've never actually met her, you know, but if she's still alive, she must be 42, 43 maybe? If she's still alive? Asakawa wondered why Hayatsu had used that expression. Maybe she was missing. Suddenly he was filled with misgivings. What if they'd come all this way to Oshima only to find no one knew if she was dead or alive? What if it was a dead end? Finally, the car pulled up in front of a two-story house bearing the sign Yamamura Manor. It stood on a gentle slope with a commanding view of the ocean. No doubt in good weather the scenery was splendid. In the offing they could make out the triangular shape of an island. That was Toshima. When the weather is nice, you can see Najima, Shikanijima, and even Kozushima from here, said Hayatsu, pointing south over the sea. 1 second. Have you guys settled down? Yeah? Hello, kitty. Hello, kitty. Now we see Gandalf head. He's a kitty. And hello, Bubby. Alright. Chapter 8. Investigate? What is it exactly I should investigate about this woman? She joined the troop in 65. You've got to be kidding. That's 25 years ago. Yoshino was ranting to himself. It's hard enough to trace a criminal step years after the fact, but 25? We need anything and everything you can find out. We want to know what kind of life this woman led and what she's doing now and what she wants. Yoshino could only sigh. He wedged the receiver between his ear and his shoulder and pulled a notepad out of the edge of the desk. And how old was she at the time? 18. She graduated from high school on Oshima and went straight to Tokyo, where she joined a theater group called Theater Group Soaring. Oshima? Yoshino stopped writing and frowned. Hey, where are you calling from anyway? From a place called Sashikiji on Izu Oshima Island. And when are you coming back? As soon as I can. You realize there's a typhoon heading your way. Of course, there was no way Asakawa could be ignorant of it, being right there in the middle of it. But to Yoshino, the whole thing had taken on an unreal quality that he'd begun to find amusing. The deadline was the night after next, and yet Asakawa himself was holed up on Oshima, possibly unable to escape. Have you heard any travel advisories? Asakawa still didn't know many details. Well, I'm not sure, but the way it looks now, I imagine they'll be grounding all flights and suspending ocean transport. Asakawa had been too busy chasing down Sadako Yamamura to pick up any reliable information about the typhoon. He'd had a bad feeling ever since stepping onto the Oshima pier, but now that the possibility of being stranded here had been voiced, he suddenly felt a sense of urgency. Receiver still in hand, he fell silent. Hey, don't worry. They haven't canceled anything yet. Yoshino tried to sound positive, then he changed the subject. So, this woman, Sadako Yamamura, you checked her history out up to the age of 18. More or less, Asakawa answered, conscious of the sound of the wind and waves outside the phone booth. This isn't your only lead, right? You've got to have something besides this theater group soaring. Nope, that's it. Sadako Yamamura, born in Sashikiji on Izu Oshima Island in 1947, to Shizuko Yamamura. Hey, make a note of that name, Shizuko Yamamura. She was 22 and 47. She left her new baby, Sadako, with her grandmother and ran off to Tokyo. Why did she leave the baby on the island? There was a man, make a note of this too, Heihachiro Ikuma. At the time he was assistant professor of psychiatry. He was Shizuko Yamamura's lover. Does this mean Sadako is Shizuko's and Ikuma's child? I haven't been able to find proof, but I think it's safe to assume that. They weren't married, right? Exactly. Heihachiro Ikuma already had a family, so it had been an illicit affair. Yoshino licked the tip of his pencil. Okay, I'm with you. Go on. Early in 1950, Shizuko suddenly revisits her hometown for the first time in 3 years. She's reunited with her daughter Sadako and lives there for a while. But by the end of the year, she's absconded again, this time taking Sadako with her. For the next 5 years, nobody knows where Shizuko and Sadako are or what they're doing. In the mid-50s, Shizuko's cousin, still living on the island, hears a rumor that Shizuko has become famous doing something or other. Was she involved in some sort of incident? It's unclear. The cousin just says he started hearing things about Shizuko through the grapevine, but when I gave him my card, he saw I worked for a newspaper and said, "If you're a reporter, you probably know about it more than me." From the way he was talking, it sounds like from about 1950 to 55, Shizuko and Sadako were involved in something that caused a stir in the media, but news from the mainland was hard to come by on the island. So you'd like me to check the news and see what was going on. You read my mind. Idiot, it was obvious. There's more. In 56, Shizuko comes back to the island, dragging Sadako with her. The mother's so worn down, she looks like a different person, and she won't answer any of her cousin's questions. She just closes up, mumbling incoherently. And then one day, she throws herself into Mount Mihara, the volcano, and kills herself. She was 31. So I'm also finding out why Shizuko committed suicide. If you would. Still holding the receiver, Asakawa bowed. If he ended up stranded on this island, then Yoshino would be his only hope. Asakawa regretted that both he and Ryuji had so blithely come here. Ryuji could have easily investigated a little hamlet like Sashikiji all by himself. It would have been more efficient for Asakawa to stay in Tokyo and wait for Ryuji to contact him, and then team up with Yoshino to check things out on that end. Alright, I'll do what I can, but I think I'm a little understaffed here. Oh goodness. Sneezing! Are you coming to check on Mommy, Bob? Yeah? You check on Mommy? Oh, you want back in Mommy lap? Okay, you sit. I'll call Oguri and ask him to send some people your way. That'd be great. It was one thing to say it, of course, but Asakawa didn't have much confidence in the idea. His editor was always complaining about being short-handed. Asakawa seriously doubted he'd spare valuable manpower for something like this. So, her mother kills herself, and Sadako stays on in Sashikiji, taken care of by her